What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the FingerWAG podcast. My name is Gideon Hertz. I'm the host of the FingerWAG podcast, coming to you on a Friday here, starting what I hope will be a new little podcast series, FingerWAG Fridays, giving you a very quick recap of the week prior for Georgetown Hoops and preview of the weekend ahead. Going to start doing these every week. Hopefully every Friday we'll drop these to get you set for the weekend. As we get into the season and focus more on games, we'll have very high level recap of end games that week. And then obviously with games occurring on the weekend, we'll have a quick preview of what we're looking for. Not going to be super in-depth, but just give you kind of a quick primer as well as a quick recap. For now, without games, we want to just do some random news notes, recaps of anything that happened previous week. Just a little short one to get you ready for your weekend, wherever you may be watching, listening. And, if you want to pull this up on a Saturday morning while you're drinking your coffee, hopefully this gives you a little bit of Georgetown Hoops fix. For this week, we just want to close out our GLOBL JAM coverage. We obviously had a lot of content over the last week or so from Canada. Shout out to all of the Georgetown staff and players and coaches, particularly Coach Cooley, who gave us a lot of time while we were up there. It was a really cool experience, and I think really valuable for the Georgetown program as well. So there's a ton of content on our site, on our podcast, on our YouTube. We also recorded a stock report pod as kind of a recap earlier this week with Jake, where we went through each of the individual Georgetown players and let you know where we stand on them, whether we're buying stock, selling stock, or holding stock. We were buying on most guys. There were a few that was a little bit of a hold and really only one sell, and it was not a big sell. It was this might be a longer term sell, and that was Julius. But you can go and take a look at that pod for all of the individual and in-depth analysis. And I think we also talked about whether we think that we're buying stock on Georgetown making the tournament, which is a good piece to debate and think about there. On the website right now, thefingerwag.com, we posted a piece earlier this week answering the 5 big questions after GLOBL JAM. Before GLOBL JAM, we posed 5 big questions that we were going to be looking for, that we were interested in getting answers to at the GLOBL JAM tournament, and we wanted to answer those. So I'll run through those really quick just to give you a recap of what we were looking for and what we found, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Either drop them on Twitter in the comments here or on our website in the comments of the article. We'll link to it in the show notes here. The first big question was, has Malik Mack taken a step, particularly with his shooting? The answer to that for me is TBD. We went into this in depth on the podcast with Jake, but we saw for much of GLOBL JAM kind of a similar result to what we saw last year, which frankly was not quite good enough for Malik. We need him to take a step, I think, particularly shooting the ball. I was a sell on Malik's performance at GLOBL JAM until the last game, where he really went off for 19 points, 6 of 15 overall. That's 40%, 37% from 3. He was great in that game, and it was, I think, really great to see. And so I'm more of a hold now, though optimistic that he can replicate that. But as I mentioned to Jake on that pod, I think it's time that he just needs to. The process looked good at GLOBL JAM, but we need to see results over a longer period of time, and that's not going to come in a 4 or 5 game tournament, but it is something that we need to look at. And I am cautiously optimistic that with the return of KJ Lewis and Langston Love, some offensive options on the floor, he's going to look even better. He just needs to make shots. We need to see him make those open shots that he gets. He did that in the last game, didn't do it as consistently throughout the tournament. But we noted, and Jake noted, he's a buy on Malik because of some of the process stuff. And I agree that the process looked a lot better for him, particularly on the pick and roll. he was snaking a lot of the pick and roll, which I think is really helpful, particularly with the lob threat that you get from Vince. I thought he did a much better job on pick and roll, which is a big area of improvement for him. And I saw him make a couple of runners or floaters that I think are big shots for him. We just need to see it more consistently. And I think we're still kind of TBD there. So for me, that's an open question still. We don't have an answer to that. Second question we posed was, what does the big rotation look like? And largely, I think it's what we saw at Global Jam, but there's some questions still to be answered. There was obviously a little bit of a a question mark when Julius started the first game against Japan. Thought, oh, wait, hold on. Is that Julius is ahead of Vince? Vince came back and started the next game against Canada and every game after that. And I think we saw that Vince is clearly the lead center in the clubhouse right now. Julius, had a really dominant game against Japan and then was just not really up to snuff the rest of the tournament. Vince took a game or two to really round into form, but once he did against Brazil in those last two games, I thought he was great. He finished the tournament averaging 9.5 points per game, almost 5.5 rebounds. That will do for the starting center for this team, considering some of the other options that they have. I think he would like to see those rebounds bump up a little bit, and noted that in the first two games he had 7 rebounds total, and like 4 or 5 of those came on one play. And then the last two games against Brazil, he had 14 rebounds, which is much better. So I'd like to see him in that 7 rebounds a game range, if not more. But he brings something that I think we haven't seen a lot of recently. I don't know that Ed Cooley has ever had this type of vertical lob threat, and we saw him just try and dunk everything ferociously, and I'm really excited about that. I think if he commits to playing inside and just playing to his strengths, he can go far. He's the type of guy that is just big, athletic. We saw how good he was defensively. He's clearly the guy there. We'll talk a little bit more about Julius in a second, because that was a separate question as well. But I think as far as the center position goes, it's Vince, it's Julius, and then it's Seal. And there's a world in which Seal is actually a better option in spots this year than Julius. If you told me that 2 weeks ago, that was going to be the case, I would be raising red flags and alarms all over the place. I'm not as concerned about that after seeing Seal at this tournament. I'm Seal curious, if you will, and I think Jake is too. And we've got a lot. He's just very solid, obviously sees the floor really well. I think he's going to get more comfortable defensively. But if you need to get 5 or 10 minutes out of a guy like Seal to just go out there and play solid and make the right play, he's going to do that. So there is a world in which I think Seal and Julius are closer to the same level. But Vince being, a 7 guy is going to be huge. And I hope that's where he's at. At the power forward spot, I think you've got, Caleb is the leader in the clubhouse there for the 4. I think you've got guys behind him that are going to play up, like DHS can play the 4. I wonder if Isaiah Abraham can play that a little bit. I think there are going to be a lot of 3-4 guard sets and 1 big. And Caleb, you can make the case that Caleb himself is even playing up a position, has 6'7", maybe 6'8", but I think he's a solid 6'7". He's proven that he can play that, though, at the Big East level. I'm not concerned about that. So I expect him to play. I think Jaden Fort showed a lot of promise at this tournament. He also looked like a kid at times who had not played for a year, or played, really competitive games for a year. So I think he's got room to improve. I think he will. But I really liked what I saw out of Jaden Fort. I think he's going to push for minutes. I think he's the type of guy that if he doesn't have it, he has the potential to hurt you pretty consistently, or pretty significantly, with, loose ball turnovers, things like that. So you want to sort of monitor that and just see if he's got it for the game. And he'll probably I could see him being a guy who gets two opportunities a game. He gets 1 in the first half. If he plays really well, he'll get a second. If he plays okay, he might get a second. And if he plays bad, he probably won't get a second opportunity in that game. And I think that that's okay for what this team needs. And I'm actually really excited about what he can bring long term to this team. So I think we got to look at the the big rotation. The next question we asked was, can anyone shoot? This is a complicated question to answer. The answer is yes. They have guys who can shoot, but maybe not enough. The context for this question is Georgetown shooting 32% from three last season as a team. That's below D1 average. Has to be better. They were not better than that as a team during this tournament. They shot just under 30%, which would be close to the bottom of D1 over over the full season. I think it's important to note that this is just a 4-game sample size, and the difference between 30% and 35% is like maybe one more made three a game. So it's important to look at the small sample size. I also would look at Vince and Julius both shooting a combined 1 for 11 from three. We talked about this on the pod, but I think we are pretty much sold on them cutting out the threes from the bigs, at least right now. Julius, I think, can hit them, but he just hasn't. He's 0 for 9 this summer in real competition. So this tournament and the FIBA U19 just hasn't hit a three. But if you take out the threes from the bigs, they shot 32% as a team. So obviously that's still not good enough. That's what they were at last year. But I think they showed that they've got some guys who can knock down shots. Caleb shot 40% in the first 2 games and then went 1 for 9. I think legs were a big issue. He just struggled to get his shot all the way to the rim. Jake had some good thoughts on that in the last pod, but I think he's closer to a 40% shooter than a 1 for 9 shooter. That's for sure. Also had other guys who shot 40% from the floor and looked like they can do that when they, get shots. Isaiah Abraham and Jeremiah Williams, both 40% on, low attempts a game, which I think is what they're going to get. But looked like they could make open shots. So I'm optimistic that this team can shoot it better, particularly with adding a guy like Langston Love, who's a 38% career three-point shooter. We don't expect KJ Lewis to be a three-point shooter, but really, who knows? There's an argument to be made that last year he was at, 25% or whatever he was. Could have been because of the wrist injury that he's been healing up for a while now. This team's got to shoot better than 32%. They've got to shoot better than I would look at around that 35% range for them to be successful. And I think there's ways to get there with, limiting the attempts from the bigs and focusing on taking those open shots. And frankly, also Malik being a little bit more consistent and being more of the 38% shooter that he was in the last game versus the 30 or 28% shooter that he was in the previous game. So there are guys who can shoot on this team. Can they shoot as a team is still a question, I think. Next question we had was, what does Cooley think he has in this team? Complicated, and I think we got a lot of answers from him directly. Again, shout out to Cooley and the staff for giving us time. So you can go check out all of Cooley's post-game pressers where we were able to ask him questions and get a sense of what he thinks of his team. I think what he thinks is this team is going to defend really well. I think he is still a work in progress offensively, and if there's any real reason to be concerned about this team coming out of Global Jam, it's that the offense just didn't look great. We talked a lot about that on the last pod, and I think there's reasons why the offense didn't look great. Missing players as well as guys, they didn't run a ton of stuff. They were trying things. I think the offense would look better, but the flip side of that is their offense was bad. I mean, bad. And they were in all 4 games, including the 2 games that they lost against legit competition. This was not a pushover tournament at all. These were good teams outside of Japan, Canada, and Brazil, both good teams that brought really high-level talent and competition. And they were in all of those games, lost their 2 games by combined 7 points, 4 points, and 3 points with chances to win at the end. And that was without really having much on the offensive end. So I think he sees that. He wants to get his team together. He also mentioned a couple of times that, this is all in pursuit of being ready for November and getting this team ready to make the NCAA tournament. And that's I think it's worth sort of establishing what the goal and expectation for this team will be. And we'll ask Coach Cooley more specifically what he sees as their goal. But I think year 3 here, it's the tournament. And I think they've got a chance to put things together to make it. We talked about, their upside is potentially even a top 7 or 8 seed in the tournament, an 8 or 7 seed, not higher than that necessarily, but who knows? But I think they could realistically be on that 7-8 line. They could also be a team that's not in the tournament. I mentioned in the piece that I think, top 4 in the Big East is not an insane projection, but top 4 in the Big East might not be enough to make the tournament if you don't do stuff in your non-conference schedule. The Big East is going to be worse this year. They got 5 teams in last year, and they're going to be worse. So if you're 4th and didn't do much in non-conference and just kind of squeaking by, I think it's going to be a real question as to whether you're going to get in. If they're top 3, I think they're pretty much solidly locked in there, but they gotta win some games in their non-conference. And I think that's part of what this tournament really helped with, is getting high-level games in August so that they're ready to play in November. And they've got some early games in November that are going to be really important for them. And I think Coach Cooley knows that. Last question that we posed was, has Julius continued to progress since June? I think that the short answer, and really the only real answer, is no, not really. He ended the FIBA U19 World Cup playing really well, and it looks like he's continued to work, obviously continued to get his body right, but he didn't look great in this tournament. He had a couple of moments and a couple of flashes, and I think, as Jake has mentioned on the pod before, just preaching patience with him, and I think that's where we're at. There's a reality here. I mentioned this already, but Seal could jump over him in the pecking order at points during this year. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world as long as Julius is continuing to improve. And I think I would start kind of inside out. They want him to be a stretch 5, a pick and pop big. I think he can be that eventually, but he needs to focus on what he's good at right now, and that is close, back to the basket, post ups. I think you work sort of from the basket out on the offensive end and get him more comfortable facing up closer to the basket and, making good decisions out of those positions, and then slowly add these other parts to his game. I think he's just going to need to build confidence and build through reps. I do think the defense is going to be tough for him. He's not the defender that some of these other guys are, certainly not that Vince is. The one thing that he can do to really, really improve defensively is rebound. We mentioned he blocks out, he takes up space, but he doesn't really go for rebounds. He's not a nose to the ball kind of guy. He's a box out and wait for one of his teammates to grab the boards. All well and good, but he's 7 feet. You're the biggest guy out there. You need to go get the ball. That will help his defense and overall his performance just in general. And I think we just didn't see that in this tournament. I don't think it's a cause to be super alarmed. It's something to sort of monitor and see how he progresses. Let us know how you're feeling about Global Jam. Those are the 5 questions that we asked pre-tournament and the 5 answers that I think we got. A lot of them, we got some good data, but not definitive answers. A couple of them we did get definitive answers. I'm really excited about this team. I will say I think they are a good basketball team. We had a good basketball team last year that fell short in a couple of areas. I think this is another good basketball team that has the potential to be really solid. I am optimistic about them, and I'm optimistic about adding KJ and Langston to this team. And there's a lot to like from guys across this roster. I think probably the biggest thing to like is about Deshaun Harris-Smith. We saw a huge performance from him across the tournament. We're at the FingerWAG are very excited about him for sure. But also the DMV connection here. And Jake mentioned it on the pod. If you can resuscitate Deshaun Harris-Smith to his pre-Maryland and high school form where he was the stud coming out of the DMV, I think that does a lot for your recruiting. And you've got 4 DMV born and bred guys on this team. It was cool to see them, cool to get their thoughts on it. We'll continue to ask that because I think it's an important angle for this team. But all in all, a really great tournament for Georgetown and for the FingerWAG. We'll shout ourselves out a little bit. We're appreciative of all the support and views and comments and thoughts. Again, please drop your thoughts on these big questions into the comments here on the website, thefingerwag.com. We'll be back next week with more coverage. Wanted to get you going for your weekend on FingerWAG Fridays, which we hope to continue over the coming weeks and months as we get ready for the season. As always, Hoya Saxa.